Thank you. Cool. So let's talk about how, let's get in here and let's go back to what we had talked about before, which was RJ talking about his EQ and his amplifier. And let's take a look at some of these things. And I want to explain why this is important to think about, like whether you're going to have your EQ before the amp or after the amp or in the amp or wherever it is. And let's do it with these here. Got this. Why is that? Oh, it's way down here. Hold on. All right, cool. So we have this here. I'm going to put this down. Nice. Okay, so I had this. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put an EQ in here. And I'll just use my EQ, the EQ that just comes with Ableton Live. And let's. Now, if I push this mid frequency here, you can hear how it starts distorting immediately, right? Turn that off. I'm going to copy that over to the other side of things. Now let's turn it on over here. Now, you'll notice that I haven't changed the EQ at all. Literally, all I did was I just took a copy of it and I moved it from in front of the preamp to after the preamp. And here, if I turn the one on before the amp, right, you hear how distorted it is. If I turn the one on after, not distorted at all. And the reason why is because this one that happens before this amp here, it's boosting the signal by like around 6 or 7 dB right here in the middle into the tube amplifier here. And it's making that overdrive. And if I do it afterwards, it's taking the clean tone that we're getting from this amp and it's just making that louder in that frequency, and it's not boosting it into something that adds distortion. And that's why, you know, thinking about your signal flow and which effects go before where in this whole scheme of things is super, super important. Understanding your routing and all that stuff is super, super, super important. So RJ says the battalion pedal has a distortion option, and that actually has a switch where you can put the distortion before, after, or without the EQ on the pedal. It's pretty cool, so it gives you the ability to hear the difference and train your ears. Absolutely, that's super awesome. Let's go back and look at that. Here it is right off. There it is. Yep. Yeah, nice. Yeah, here's that pedal you're talking about, yeah. Or the pedal, the distortion. So here's our bass, low, mid, high, treble. That's the EQ. And then here, it's got distortion here. Level, blend, drive, tone. Tone is going to be like brighter, darker. Drive is going to be more distortion, less distortion. Blend is going to be a dry, wet. And level is going to be your level. And then this distortion can go before the EQ or after the EQ. Or what's that other option there? Dry EQ. What is that for? That's neat. Yeah, and you can turn the distortion on with the pedal, turn it with your foot, or you can just bypass the whole thing. So you can use this just as a EQ, or you can add distortion into it as well. Interesting. So dry EQ is probably like a parallel type of thing. Interesting. So the EQ stays on the clean signal that you mix with the blend knob, but doesn't affect the distortion. Okay. Huh. Yeah, so it's like a parallel type of thing. That's cool. Interesting. All right. So let's take a look at this in a little bit more detail. Yeah, I bet you have. Yeah, super cool. And are you using this with a bass or a guitar? All right. Both. Oh, nice. Okay, cool. So in RJ's case, he's got his EQ in here in the effect chain, somewhere in here somewhere. And he doesn't have any EQ up here in the amplifier. So he needs the EQ there. Oh, and sense too, yeah. Yeah, I totally get it, right? So let's take a little bit. So this effect chain here, if we go all the way back over to here, these are all inserts. And the inserts are basically these guitar pedals. If you remember all the way back to the beginning of things, this is where we started back in part 1 in the first hour, talking about inserts and the routing. So in Pro Tools, the type of insert that you have, and basically it's these guitar pedals, it's like these pedals here, the type of insert you have really, really matters. And also the order of the inserts really matters. And this is not just Pro Tools. We're talking about Pro Tools here because I just wanted to show it on the screen like a Pro Tools signal chain, but also in Ableton Live. So let's have an example of this here. And that's basically what we're looking at here is this example. Here's if I got this keyboard. If I want to get that mid-tone into the sound more, but I don't want it to be overdriving at all, I can do it here. But if I want to have it be going into my EQ or into my tube, do it here. Yeah, but I have to pull it back too much. Right? And neither one of them is the wrong sound. They're both fine sounds, but they're very, very different sounds. And I have my EQ there. I'm just kind of messing with the EQ there. Cool. So you see how that works there. Now, this is a lot with a lot of different sounds. Let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and load in the drum beat here. Just going to save this real quick. To say signal flow effects, signal flow. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually load up the drum beat. Put this at 85. And we're going to load up the drum beat that I bounced down yesterday. And I think I left it slightly chords. Yeah, I left it sitting on my desktop here. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my drum group. Drum group is here. I'm going to drag it into here. There we go. So I have this here and 85, great. And we're going to loop this. Let's do a 4-bar loop. So now we're going to play this beat. And now we're going to add some, let's add some effects onto it. So let's go ahead and add a filter. Let me get rid of this utility plugin so it doesn't get confusing. I'm going to write these down as well as I'm adding them in. And we're going to write this as testing signal chain effect order. Effect. The effect signal chain order, okay? So what we've got here is we've got our dry signal. which in this case is our drums. And they're not dry, they have effects and stuff on them, but it's just our original signal. And then what I'm going to do is we're going to use let's use a high pass filter. And also a distortion. And I want to show you the importance of this order here. And these two here are the ones we're going to switch. And what I just want to say right now is that neither what we're about to test, there's nothing wrong with either one. It all depends on what kind of sound you want to go for. And the more you try this out, the more you mess with this stuff, the more you start to understand about, in your head, you'll know like basically what the outcome is going to be before you actually do it. So let's go ahead and use this. There's my auto filter. And now let's use a distortion. And one of my favorite distortions, let's see. Let's get my control panel. Okay, we're using a lot of our, hold on, let me go ahead and take off. Let's see if we can throw one more on here. Wait. Oh, I don't really need this one here. Okay. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go in here and we're going to use the, one of my favorite distortion pedals from UAD is the Bermuda Triangle. This thing is dope. Sounds so good. Oops, wrong one. There we go. So, okay, actually, let's do this parallel. I want to make this as a parallel effect chain. Does anybody know what I mean when I say parallel effect chain? Okay, well, side by side, exactly. Having it on as a bus, yes, y'all are right, okay? When you send a portion of it, yes, exactly. Now, why do you know that? Todd showed you, yes, and he showed you with the toning notes? Yep, to combine it with the OG signal later, yep. Okay, so parallel, awesome, yay. Okay, so parallel, just a little review real quick, is side by side. So for example, you have group here. Like that. This would be chain A. This would be chain B. I'm really glad. Yeah, and then John Sickett talked about in the audience. Great, that's awesome. I'm really glad that y'all remember that because this is so, so important. And this is all sound design stuff. This is all about getting that right sound, the sound that you're hearing in your head or the sound that you want to hear in your head. This is super important for getting that right sound. So this is really important for people who are doing sound design stuff, for engineers, mix engineers, even recording engineers. Right now, I'm not, got your acoustic pickup DI'd and adding amp plugs, awesome. So I'm, obviously right now I'm not going out to clubs and stuff right now. But when I do go out to clubs, every now and then I run into old students or I'd run into people who've come through SAE or whatever in the past. And it happens quite a bit, actually, because A, I'm always out. But one of the things that I talk to people, or maybe when I'm talking to like sound engineers or whatever, one of the things I always ask people about, like, what is the most important thing in the real world? And a lot of people say to me, it has like routing. Routing is one of the most important things that you can master in your time in school. Really wrapping your head around it. And it's the type of thing that it does take a while to wrap your head around. It took me forever to understand the importance of signal flow. And also took me another forever to understand how to even do anything with good signal flow. So it's something that I really want you to get into your brains and understand it, but it's also the type of thing that some people are going to get it right away, and some people it's going to take a little bit longer. So don't get discouraged if it takes you a little bit longer. It took me forever to understand it. But so here's parallel side-by-sides to chain A, chain B, and then as opposed to the other side of this would be serial. And serial is inline. Okay, so you start with the, as Joanna said, the OG sound. I like that. And you just got all these effects. Like that. And that's serial. I'm super serial right now. Man, bear, pig. It's a thing. All right. So right now we're just running the serial, and I'm just going to show you this, but I do want to run this parallel here in a little bit. But I want to show you, I just want to show you half man, half bear, and half pig. Okay. Okay, so we have this. Here's our distortion. I also like serial. So you hear how different that tone changes as we mess with, it really is interesting. Right, so let's put this after here. And I'm going to turn on, so right now let's listen to it one more time before the Bermuda Triangle. Right? And we're hearing a lot of the high frequencies getting distorted because there's a lot of high frequencies in this beat right now. And if we turn that off and go like this, yeah. Right? So listen to how different that sounds. And we didn't even change anything, we just changed the order. So here it is with the auto filter before the distortion pedal. Right? And here it is with it after the distortion pedal. That is like night and day on the sounds. And literally, the only change is where in the order is that filter happening. That's the only change. So, for example, if I have and the reason why is because, is the distortion pedal increasing sub-bass frequency? Is that why we hear it well, so here's I'm going to explain exactly why. This is a great question. Why are we hearing it so differently? It's because of the way that distortion works on audio. So let's listen to this whole thing dry real quick. Okay, so you hear that. Now here, let's go ahead and look at let's look at an EQ here as well. So here's this. I'm going to turn this off. So you can see there's a ton of low frequencies going on here because there's a big 808 in here. And there are also a lot of high frequencies. They're not super, super loud. That kind of sound is pretty high up in the mix. Actually, if I was going to mix this again, I would turn that thing down. But we can see, there's a ton of low frequencies. Now, we don't really hear those low end frequencies. I mean, unless you're listening to this on a club sound system with like, 15-inch subs, you're not hearing that low end very, very much. And can anybody tell me why we're not going to hear that low end? I'm going to go ahead while we're thinking about that. We're going to draw this here. Here. So here's our signal. Why is it that we're not hearing that low end just crushing things? Distortion has a high pass. No, I've got the distortion turned off right now, actually. So if I listen to it again, we're hearing it, and the EQ is just cutting off like 30 hertz and like up here at like 18 kilohertz, but that's about it. Here, I'll even turn this one off so I did not, well, no. There's an EQ on here at 30 hertz. You're not hearing 30 hertz. Like 30 hertz is too low for you. So this, I'm going to turn it off so it doesn't matter. I'm not EQing anything. This is just here so you can see it. Okay. So the thing is, our ears are not designed. The question is, why don't we hear, like there's a ton of low end in here. Why is it not just crushing us? Why are we not hearing it so much? And the answer is, if I have my signal looks like this, right? 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz is our hearing range, right? Now, that's not entirely true, 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. First of all, before we mess it up with going to clubs, but it's also, we don't really hear so well down to 20 hertz. That's like, you can kind of perceive it, but really we're going to feel those frequencies more than we're going to hear them. So like I said, if you're listening to us on a club system, then you're going to hear these frequencies a lot. But if you're just listening to it on your headphones or on your computers or your iPad or whatever, you're really not going to hear that low end very much. Hold on, let me get so you can see what I'm doing. There we go, frequency. Okay, so frequency, low, high, and here's our level. Okay, so in this scenario here, we're not really hearing all that low end that's in there. We're hearing mostly the stuff in here. This is mostly what we're hearing a lot of, and a little bit this is we hear it. This down here is more like what we feel, right? So this is what's happening. And then if we've messed up our ear hearing a lot, then that's the high stuff. We're not really going to hear it too much. But this is what's going on here. So if I put so the way this works is that a distortion, just like a compressor, is distorting all the frequencies at once. Okay, so it's getting all the frequencies going on at once. And if we put the distortion on there with no EQs at all whatsoever, it's distorting everything. But really what it's doing is it's working on that low frequency. So if we go back here, and I'm going to turn this on here. The curve looks basically the same. Here, let me play it without it. But you can see the curve of our frequencies is a lot down in the lower frequencies, and it kind of like is even and then tapers off in the high frequencies. If I put on my distortion, it's going to look basically the same. It's distorting that signal a lot. But if I cut those low frequencies using the filter before, so here, let's just do this. Let's say if I cut the low frequencies off, let's do this. Let me copy this, copy. I'll paste this here. And we're going to get rid of these here. Actually, you know what? Here, let me do it differently. Do it like this. Boop. Delete. There we go. Okay, so we've got this here. What happens when I have a low cut, or the high pass filter, this is going to cut out these low frequencies going into it. So now only the high frequencies of the beat go into the distortion. So the distortion only is distorting the high frequencies. Okay. Whereas if I put the low pass, if I put the, well, actually, hold on, wait. Why am I drawing that? Hold on, that's not right. That's not right. So the high pass filter is going to cut them off before. If it cuts off the frequencies before it goes into the distortion, only the high frequency of the beat are going to go into the distortion. But if it cuts it off after, what's happening is all the frequencies are going in, so it's distorting mostly on the low end, and then we're cutting it out after it comes out. So the sound is very, very different. Those high frequencies aren't getting distorted as much. That's what I wanted to say. Hold on. There we go. I can put those back there. So let's take a look at that and listen to it. So here's the beat by itself. All right, here it is with the distortion. Here it is with the distortion with the high pass filter before the distortion. We're hearing mostly those mid and high frequencies, and because that's the distortion's like cranking those up. Now, if I let the whole frequency go into the distortion, but then I cut the signal, the low frequencies out after the distortion, we're going to hear a very different sound. So now we're hearing that low tone being distorted, but we're just cutting out the low frequencies of that low tone being distorted. Whereas if the filter is before it, we're not hearing the low tones being distorted at all. It's just the high tones being distorted. And I hope that makes some kind of sense. But really, at the end of the day, it's about what's your order. Is your order going to be the dry signal going into the high pass filter into distortion, or is it going to be the other way around? That helps? Good. I'm glad that helps. Cool. Dry signal. And this stuff is super, super important. So if you're working on a mix that has a lot of low ends, EQing low parts first would help fix the boomy bass, the boominess. Absolutely. Yep. So, and we'll talk about, we'll go into a whole thing about like mixing and stuff. And actually, I mean, John is the expert on that. So I'm gonna have John actually talk about that with y'all, and we're gonna figure out how to get John's voice piped in here and maybe put some stuff on my screen. But with John talking, we actually did that in a meeting today, and it worked really well. So if you're working on a mix that has a lot of low ends, EQing low parts first, like working on that low end, getting the low end really situated, that's going to help that boominess a whole lot. And that's really where you start. That's where I start my mixes, is really focusing on the low end and getting the low end to sit right and work with itself. And there's a lot of cool tricks and stuff that you can do with that. But this type of stuff is super, super important in here. So how can we change the order? Let's go all the way back here to our very first one here and talk about in Pro Tools, what is the signal flow here for this? So let me go ahead and let's go ahead and duplicate this, boop. There we go. Okay, so our signal flow, do we know what the signal flow is on the channel? Up to down. Kind of, actually, but not entirely. We have the signal goes, actually, it really goes like this. We start here, number 1. And here, wait, let's label this. This is going to be labeled post fader. And let me go ahead and bring this down a little bit to right here. Yeah, that's a good place for it. Post fader. So the signal goes through the inserts first, number 1, and then actually start with this. Number 1 is here, and then it goes to here, number 2, and then it's going to go to number 3 down here, the fader. And if there's a send, it's also going to go from number 4 here, and then number 5. Let's change that. Let's call this one 4A and 4B. Let's word it like that. And if we are pre-fader, it's going to go like this. It's going to go number 1, number 2, and then number 3, 4, 5. But these here, it's going to go out. It doesn't go from 3 into 4. I hope that makes sense. You're thinking of the Mackie channel strip along with audience strips. No, well, yes, but actually they're all the same, because pre-fader and post-fader. Now, first of all, what am I talking about when I'm talking about pre-fader versus post-fader? What does that mean, pre-fader versus post-fader? Like, what is the pre-fader? What is the post-fader? The signal before or after the fader. Thank you very much, Lewis. Joanna says, effects cannot be heard in pre-fader signal. No, the effects can be heard. You're affecting the signal before using the volume control of the DAW. Pre is dry, post is processed. But what are we, post process? Actually, this is, no, you're all wrong. You're all going in the right direction, and I like where your heads are at, but you're not correct. Sorry. Okay? So, pre-post fader has to do with our sends. Okay? Pre-post fader has to do with the sends in the signal chain, okay? So, let's get another. Let me get a, move this up here. Boop, boop, boop. There we go, cool. So with, yeah, we're doing okay for time. So if I have, let's say, pre-fader, and this doesn't matter if you're on the Audient, it doesn't matter if you're in the Mackie or whatever. If we have post-fader, and this is generally the default setting for most everything. So what happens is your signal, this is our input signal, goes into the preamp and gets louder, usually. Then it goes into our effects, insert effects. And then it goes through the main fader. And it goes to our output, the channel out. Right? But with post fader, the signal gets hijacked here and goes to our send out, like that. So in this case, this main fader affects the signal level being sent to the send. So if I turn that fader down, it's going to affect the level going out to my send effect. But all the effects, all the stuff we've just talked about is on there as well. So let's go ahead and look. Wait, no. What was I going to look at? Yeah. Here, let's go ahead and look at this real quick in here. And this is all this, remember we were talking about subgroup mixing and stuff like that. Well, it all comes back to this. So let's take a look at this. I've got my, let's go ahead and have my sends here. I'm going to put a reverb on here on my but not this. I got the wrong reverb. I was like playing with it earlier. All right, so we can hear that reverb better. Now, if I go ahead and I'm in post fader mode right now, and we can see over here on the right-hand side it says post fader send. If I say post fader send, if I turn my volume down on this drum here, this drum loop, everything gets turned down. Even though my level is all the way up here on send A, we can't hear it because send A is after my level. Send A is right here. It's after my main fader. But if we go into pre-mode here, let's go ahead and write that in. Here's this. And now we're going to go from here into the, now we're just going to keep this main fader. And with pre-fader, it comes right here. Boop. Send out. And in this case, let's give it a slightly different color. The fader does not affect the level of the send. Does not affect it. So if I put this over here, watch. Turn this up. Put this on pre. Over here. In my room. I turn my level all the way down, but we're still hearing the sound because it's still sending it from here. I change this back to post. We're not hearing it anymore. Right. And Josh Gabay. So Kishan says, which way do you prefer mixing pre or post fader? Well, you always mix like 98% of the time. You're always going to be post fader. Pre fader is used for a very specific thing. It's something that's a pretty specific thing, and let's see if anybody knows what it is. What would you use pre fader for like 90% of the time? It's not for mixing. Usually you're not mixing with pre-fader. You're doing something else with pre-fader. Pre-fader is specifically for something, which is something you should have talked about in Todd's class, but it may have been something that kind of slipped by. Anybody know? Headphone mixes, yes. Monitor mixes in general. Headphone or the artist mix, however you want to call it. Yes, you're right. Headphone mix, artist mix, monitor mix, that kind of stuff. That's what the pre-fader is generally used for. So you can have one mix for you, that's going to be your faders, and then one mix that the artist is hearing in their headphones, or if you're on a live sound stage, they're going to be listening like what they're going to be listening to on a stage in a live situation, something like that. Pre-cueing for DJs, I guess DJs, we're not really using send effects very much on DJs, so it's not really something I don't think about it like that. I just use my cue. I just hit the cue button and just have the whole thing go into my headphones. So what I'm hearing in my headphones is just the entire mix. But that's just because I've had to learn how to DJ in horrible sound situations. All right, let's stop there for 10 minutes. Let's come back at right. Let me go ahead and pause this, stopping recording now.